They say dogs are man's best friend. But mine was more than that. She was the only reason I survived. Her name was Daisy, and she died in my arms on a cold Tuesday night, foam bubbling from her mouth, her brown eyes fading as I screamed for help that came too late. The woman who killed her stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching me cradle my dying companion. And when Daisy's last breath escaped her trembling body, my neighbor, Mrs. Clara James, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Maybe now you'll shut up at night." That was the moment I realized some people aren't just cruel. They're evil, and evil, as I learned, has a way of destroying itself. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what Daisy meant to me. You need to know why her death wasn't just the loss of a pet, it was the attempted murder of my soul. My name is Grace, and I'm 28 years old. 3 years ago, I was a different person. I had a marketing job in downtown Seattle, a boyfriend who made me laugh, and plans for a future that seemed bright and predictable. I was naive enough to believe that bad things happened to other people. That changed on a rainy October evening when I decided to walk home from work instead of taking the bus. The shortcut through Brooks Park seemed safe enough. Families used it during the day, joggers passed through at dusk. I'd walked it dozens of times before. The man who attacked me was a stranger. He dragged me behind the maintenance shed, and for 11 minutes, I know because the police timed it later, he tried to destroy everything I was. He didn't just assault my body. He shattered my sense of safety, my trust in the world, my ability to exist in my own skin. I survived. Physically, at least. But the person who crawled out of that park wasn't the same Grace who'd walked in. She was broken in ways I didn't know were possible. The nightmares started immediately. I'd wake up screaming, clawing at the air, convinced he was still there. My heart would race so fast I thought it might explode. I couldn't sleep in the dark. I couldn't be alone. I couldn't touch another human being without my skin crawling. My boyfriend tried to be patient, but patience has limits. He left after 4 months, saying he couldn't handle the baggage. My job let me go when I missed too many days due to panic attacks. Many of my friends stopped calling when I canceled plans over and over again. By Christmas, I was living in a studio apartment in Ballard, surviving on disability payments and the kindness of my therapist, Dr. Park, who suggested something that seemed impossible at the time. A psychiatric service dog. You need someone who can recognize your episodes before they escalate, she explained. Someone who can wake you from nightmares, fetch your medication, create physical barriers when you're overwhelmed. Someone who won't judge you, won't leave you, won't give up on you. That's how I found Daisy. She was a 2-year-old golden retriever at a specialized training facility in Tacoma. The moment I walked into that room, she looked up at me with these impossibly gentle brown eyes, and I knew. She knew too. She padded over, sat beside my chair, and placed her head on my lap like she'd been waiting for me her whole life. Daisy wasn't just trained to detect the signs of PTSD episodes, she was a master at it. She could sense a panic attack coming 20 minutes before I felt the first flutter of anxiety. She'd nudge my hand, lead me to my safe space, and position herself between me and the door. When the nightmares hit, she'd lick my face until I woke up, then curl up against my chest until my breathing returned to normal. She was more than a service dog. She was my anchor to sanity, my proof that something in this world still wanted to protect me instead of hurt me. For 18 months, Daisy and I built a new life together. I found a small house to rent in Greenwood, a quiet neighborhood where I thought we could heal in peace. The house had a fenced backyard where Daisy could run, neighbors who seemed friendly enough, and most importantly, space between me and the rest of the world. I started sleeping through the night. I could walk to the grocery store without having a panic attack. I even began taking online classes to finish my degree. Daisy was always there, during the bad days when I couldn't get out of bed, and during the good days when I remembered what hope felt like. But our peace was about to be shattered by the woman next door. Clara James was 73 years old, a widow who'd lived in the same house for 42 years. She was the kind of person who measured her lawn with a ruler and complained to the city about dandelions. Her house was immaculate, her schedule rigid, and her tolerance for anything that disrupted her carefully ordered world was non-existent. The first time I met her, I was planting flowers in my front yard while Daisy sunbathed nearby. Mrs. James marched over, introduced herself, and immediately informed me that barking dogs were not tolerated in this neighborhood. Oh, Daisy barely barks, I said, scratching behind my dog's ears. She's actually a service dog, so she's really well trained. Mrs. James's expression soured. Service dog? You look perfectly fine to me. I suppose everyone claims their pet is a service dog these days. I tried to explain that not all disabilities are visible, that Daisy was specially trained for PTSD, but Mrs. James waved me off like I was lying. Just keep it quiet, she said, and stalked back to her house. I should have known then that this woman would be trouble. But I was focused on healing, on building a life where Daisy and I could exist without fear. I had no idea that fear was about to move in next door. The complaint started within a month. Mrs. James called the HOA about everything. My grass was too long, my mailbox was the wrong shade of blue, my recycling bins were visible from the street. But her real target was always Daisy. That dog barks constantly, she'd tell anyone who would listen. It's disrupting the entire neighborhood. The truth was, Daisy only barked during my episodes, and only when I was in distress. She was doing exactly what she was trained to do, alerting others that I needed help. But to Mrs. James, my suffering was just noise. The first formal complaint came in February. I received a letter from the HOA stating that excessive barking had been reported from my address. I attended the next meeting with Daisy's service dog certification, medical documentation from Dr. Park, and a detailed explanation of how PTSD service dogs work. We understand your situation, the president said, but we also have to consider the comfort of other residents. Mrs. James sat in the front row, nodding along. I have a right to peace and quiet in my own home, she declared. If she can't control her animal, maybe she shouldn't have one. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that Daisy's barking wasn't random. It was a medical alert, as necessary as a smoke detector or a burglar alarm. Instead, I explained calmly that I was working with a trainer to minimize any disruption while maintaining Daisy's ability to do her job. But Mrs. James wasn't interested in compromise. Over the next few months, she escalated her campaign. She started keeping a log of every time Daisy barked, noting the time, duration, and volume. She sent daily emails to the HOA, the city, and anyone else who might listen. She even called the police, claiming that I was violating noise ordinances. The worst part was how she talked to other neighbors. I'd overhear her at the mailbox, poisoning them against me with half-truths and outright lies. She claims it's a service dog, but it's obviously just a pet, she'd say. She's probably faking the whole disability thing. You know how people are these days, always looking for special treatment. Some neighbors believed her. I could see it in their faces when I walked by, the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when I got too close. Mrs. James was turning my sanctuary into a battlefield, but she wasn't content with just destroying my reputation. She wanted to destroy my ability to function. In June, she started banging on the shared fence between our houses close to my bedroom window whenever Daisy barked. The sound was like gunshots in my fragile mind, triggering panic attacks that would leave me gasping on the floor while Daisy frantically tried to calm me down. Which, of course, led to more barking and more banging. She installed motion-activated floodlights pointed directly at my house, claiming they were for security. They turned on every time Daisy went outside, flooding my room with harsh white light at all hours of the night. She started leaving notes in my mailbox, nasty, vindictive messages that attacked not just Daisy, but me personally. Some of us have real problems, one read. Your self-pity isn't my responsibility. The cruelest note came in August. Maybe if you weren't so weak, you wouldn't need a crutch with 4 legs. I kept every note of her harassment. I thought I was building a case, gathering evidence to prove that she was the problem, not me. I thought the system would protect me if I just followed the rules and kept my head down. I was wrong. Mrs. James's campaign reached its peak in September. She convinced 2 other neighbors to sign a petition demanding that I remove Daisy from the property. The HOA scheduled a hearing for October 15th, a hearing that would determine whether I could keep my service dog. The stress was killing me. My episodes were getting worse, which meant Daisy was barking more, which gave Mrs. James more ammunition. I felt trapped in a cycle of escalation that I couldn't break. Dr. Park suggested I consider moving, but I couldn't afford to relocate. I'd used all my savings to get Daisy and make the house accessible for my needs. I was stuck, and Mrs. James knew it. "You can't win," she told me one afternoon as I collected my mail. "I've lived here for 40 years. I know everyone on this block. They trust me, not some unstable girl who can't control her dog." She was right about one thing: I couldn't win. Not the way I was trying to win. But I wasn't going to lose, either. I just didn't know it yet. October 10th started like any other day. I spent the morning working on my online coursework while Daisy napped in her favorite spot by the window. I had a therapy session with Dr. Park in the afternoon, where we discussed strategies for the upcoming HOA hearing. "Remember," she said, "you have rights. The law is on your side. Mrs. James can't force you to give up Daisy just because she's inconvenient." I wanted to believe her, but I'd learned that being legally right doesn't always translate to being actually protected. That evening, I made dinner and settled in to watch a movie with Daisy curled up beside me on the couch. It was a quiet night. No episodes, no barking, no drama. Just me and my dog, existing peacefully in our little bubble of safety. I went to bed around 11, with Daisy taking her usual position on the floor beside me. She always slept there, positioned so she could monitor my breathing and wake me if I started having nightmares. The panic attack hit at 2:30 a.m. I woke up screaming, my heart pounding, my body covered in sweat. The nightmare had been particularly vivid. I was back in that park, unable to escape, unable to breathe. Daisy immediately sprang into action, jumping onto the bed and nuzzling my face, trying to ground me in reality. But instead of calming down, I spiraled deeper into the episode. My breathing became rapid and shallow. My vision blurred. I felt like I was dying, like my chest was being crushed by an invisible weight. Daisy did what she was trained to do. She barked. Sharp, urgent barks designed to alert others that I needed help. In my apartment building, this would have brought my neighbors running. Here, it was just another reason for Mrs. James to hate us. The episode lasted about 20 minutes. When it finally passed, I was exhausted, drained, and deeply ashamed. I knew Mrs. James had heard everything. I knew she'd be furious. But Daisy had done her job. She'd kept me tethered to reality when my mind tried to drag me back to hell. "Good girl," I whispered, scratching behind her ears. "You're such a good girl." We settled back into bed, and I managed to fall asleep around 3 a.m. Daisy stayed vigilant for another hour, making sure I was truly settled before allowing herself to rest. Neither of us heard Mrs. James's back door open at 3:15 a.m. Neither of us saw her creep across her yard, carrying a small package wrapped in aluminum foil. Neither of us noticed her lean over our shared fence and toss the package into our backyard. But at 6 a.m., when I let Daisy outside for her morning routine, she found it immediately. To her, it probably smelled like hamburger meat, a special treat left by a neighbor who was finally being kind. She ate it in 3 bites. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard her start to whimper. By the time I got outside, she was vomiting uncontrollably, her whole body convulsing. Foam bubbled from her mouth, and her eyes were wide with terror and confusion. "Daisy!" I screamed, dropping to my knees beside her. "Oh God, Daisy, what's wrong?" I scooped her up, all 60 pounds of her, and ran to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. Daisy was limp in my arms, her breathing shallow and labored. The emergency vet was 15 minutes away. I made it in 8, running red lights and sobbing Daisy's name the entire way. "Help me!" I screamed as I burst through the clinic doors. "Something's wrong with my dog." The vet tech took one look at Daisy and called for the doctor immediately. They whisked her away while I stood in the waiting room, covered in vomit and foam, my whole world crumbling around me. Dr. Price came out 20 minutes later, her face grim. "I'm sorry," she said. "We did everything we could, but the poison was too strong. She's gone." Poison. The word hit me like a physical blow. Someone had deliberately killed my dog. Someone had murdered the only thing that kept me sane, the only thing that made me feel safe in this world. "What kind of poison?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know yet," she replied. "We'll need to analyze samples, stomach contents, vomitus, blood work. It could take hours before we have any answers." Hours later, she returned with grim results. "Sodium fluorosidate mixed with ground glass," she said quietly. "Whoever did this wanted to make sure it worked." I don't remember driving home. I don't remember walking into my backyard. But I remember finding the torn aluminum foil, still smelling like hamburger meat. I remember the way my legs gave out, the way I collapsed onto the grass where Daisy had died. And I remember looking up to see Mrs. James standing on her back porch, arms crossed, watching me with cold satisfaction. "Finally," she said, loud enough for me to hear, "maybe now you'll shut up at night." Then she went inside and closed the door. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run over there and tear her apart with my bare hands. I wanted to burn her house down and dance in the ashes. Instead, I lay in the grass where my best friend had died and sobbed until I had no tears left. But even in that moment of absolute devastation, something was crystallizing in my mind. Mrs. James had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was destroying me, but she'd actually set me free. When you've already lost everything, you have nothing left to lose. And that makes you very, very dangerous. I spent the next 3 days in a haze of grief so thick I could barely function. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except the way Daisy had looked at me in those final moments. Confused, trusting, wondering why I couldn't make the hurt stop. Dr. Park made house calls, worried that I might hurt myself. She brought groceries, helped me arrange for Daisy's cremation, and gently suggested that we talk about getting another service dog when I was ready. "I'm not ready," I told her. "I might never be ready." "Grace," she said gently, "you can't let this destroy you. That's exactly what she wants." She was right, but I wasn't thinking about what Mrs. James wanted. I was thinking about justice. I was thinking about making sure this never happened to anyone else. On the 4th day, I finally felt strong enough to call the police. Officer Price, no relation to the vet, came to my house to take a statement. He was kind but skeptical. "You think your neighbor poisoned your dog?" he asked, reviewing his notes. "I know she did," I said, showing him the aluminum foil I'd saved. "She's been harassing me for months. I have documentation." I gave him copies of everything, the HOA complaints, the nasty notes, the emails from city officials. He listened patiently but didn't seem convinced. "This shows she didn't like your dog," he said. "But proving she actually poisoned it, that's harder. Do you have any witnesses, any direct evidence?" I didn't. I had motive, opportunity, and a dead dog, but no proof that would hold up. Officer Price promised to file a report and speak with Mrs. James, but I could tell he thought I was a grieving pet owner looking for someone to blame. After he left, I sat in my empty house and realized that the system wasn't going to help me. Mrs. James had been too careful, too clever. She'd killed Daisy in a way that left just enough doubt to avoid prosecution. But she'd also underestimated me. She thought I was just some weak, broken girl who would crumble under pressure. She had no idea that broken people are often the most dangerous, because they understand how much pain one person can inflict on another. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started with research. I spent hours online, learning about pet poisoning cases, studying what evidence was needed for prosecution, understanding the legal system that had failed me. I read about other people who'd lost their animals to cruel neighbors, and I learned that Mrs. James was far from unique. But I also learned that very few of these cases resulted in real consequences. Most neighbors got away with it because proving intent was nearly impossible. The victims were left with nothing but grief and rage. I wasn't going to be another statistic. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Miss Rebecca Garvey lived on the other side of my house, a retired teacher who'd always been kind to me and Daisy. She knocked on my door exactly 1 week after Daisy's death, holding a manila envelope. "I need to show you something," she said, her face grave. "But first, I need you to promise me you won't do anything stupid." I invited her in, and she opened the envelope to reveal a stack of printed screenshots. Security camera footage, time-stamped and clear. "I installed cameras few months ago," she explained. "My grandson was worried about package theft. I never thought I'd catch something like this." The first image showed my backyard at 3:14 a.m. on October 10th. Empty, peaceful, normal. The second image was time-stamped 3:15 a.m., and it showed a figure in a bathrobe approaching my fence. Mrs. James. The third image was the smoking gun, Mrs. James leaning over the fence, her arm extended, dropping something into my yard. Her face was clearly visible, illuminated by her own motion sensor lights. "She killed your dog," Miss Garvey said quietly, "and I have proof." I stared at the images, my hands shaking. After a week of grief and helplessness, I finally had what I needed, evidence that would hold up in court. But as I looked at those pictures, I realized something else. Mrs. James's expression in that final image wasn't one of someone acting impulsively. She looked calm, determined, almost satisfied. This wasn't a moment of anger or frustration. This was premeditated murder. Armed with Miss Garvey's security footage, I went back to Officer Price. His attitude changed immediately when he saw the images. "This is excellent evidence," he said, studying the timestamps. "We can definitely pursue charges now. Animal cruelty in the first degree, possibly with aggravating circumstances." "What kind of aggravating circumstances?" I asked. "The premeditation. The fact that she targeted a service animal. The cruelty of using ground glass along with the poison. A prosecutor could make a strong case that this was especially heinous." For the first time in a week, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope, but I also felt curious. If Mrs. James had been willing to kill Daisy, what else had she done? How many other animals had suffered because of her? I started asking questions around the neighborhood. Casually, carefully, just a grieving pet owner trying to understand if this was an isolated incident. The answers were disturbing. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 3 houses down, mentioned that her cat had died mysteriously 2 years ago. "Poor Whiskers just started vomiting one day and never stopped," she said. "The vet said it might have been poisoning, but we never found out what caused it." Mr. Thompson, across the street, told me about his family's dog who died under similar circumstances. Buddy was only 4 years old, healthy as a horse. Then one morning he was just gone, foam around his mouth, just like what you described. The more I talked to people, the clearer the pattern became. Over the past 5 years, at least 4 animals in our immediate neighborhood had died from apparent poisoning. All of them had been pets that Mrs. James had complained about. All of them had died in the same way: sudden onset of vomiting, foam at the mouth, death within hours. But here's the thing about pet poisoning cases: they're rarely investigated thoroughly. Most people assume their animal got into something by accident: rat poison in a garage, antifreeze in a driveway, something toxic in the garbage. The idea that a neighbor might be systematically murdering pets is so horrible that most people can't even consider it. Mrs. James had been counting on that. She'd been killing animals for years, secure in the knowledge that nobody would connect the dots. But I was connecting them now. I compiled a list of every suspicious pet death in the neighborhood and cross-referenced it with noise complaints, HOA violations, and any other records I could find. The pattern was undeniable. Mrs. James had been waging a war against any animal that dared to disturb her peace. And she'd been winning. I took my research to Officer Price, who was impressed but not surprised. "Serial animal abuse is more common than people think," he told me. "Some people who escalate to killing animals eventually move on to targeting humans. We need to stop her before that happens." The investigation moved quickly after that. Armed with evidence and a clear pattern of behavior, the police obtained search warrants for Mrs. James's home and property. What they found there made my blood run cold. In her garage, they discovered a stockpile of different kinds of poisons. But more damaging were the purchase receipts they found in her kitchen cabinet, couple of them for various toxins and poisons. The receipt for sodium fluorosidate was particularly chilling, purchased 3 days before Daisy's death. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. I watched from my window as police cars surrounded Mrs. James's house, as officers led her away in handcuffs while she protested her innocence. "This is harassment," she shouted, looking directly at my house. "That girl is lying. She's mentally unstable. Even facing arrest, she couldn't stop attacking me." The charges were serious: 4 counts of animal cruelty in the first degree, 1 count of destruction of property, since Daisy was considered valuable property under the law, and 1 count of criminal harassment. The prosecutor was also exploring federal charges, since targeting a service animal carried additional penalties. Mrs. James hired an expensive lawyer who immediately began attacking my credibility. They claimed I was an unreliable witness due to my PTSD, that I was seeking attention and sympathy, that I'd made up the whole story to get revenge on a difficult neighbor. But they couldn't explain away the security footage. They couldn't dismiss the physical evidence found in her garage. And they certainly couldn't account for the purchase receipts, dozens of them for various toxins and poisons, each one dated just days before another neighborhood pet had died mysteriously. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for December 1st. I was prepared to testify, to face Mrs. James in court and tell the world what she'd done to Daisy and all the other innocent animals who had the misfortune of living near her. But Mrs. James had other problems besides the criminal charges. The HOA, which had been so eager to side with her against me, suddenly found themselves dealing with a public relations nightmare. The woman they'd supported in her complaints against my noisy service dog had turned out to be a serial animal killer. The story was picked up by national news outlets, and the Greenwood Heights Homeowners Association became a punchline on social media. Board members who dismissed my concerns were now scrambling to distance themselves from Mrs. James. They issued public apologies, implemented new policies protecting service animals and all pets, and quietly settled the discrimination lawsuit my lawyer had filed against them. But the real consequences for Mrs. James were just beginning. The criminal charges were serious enough to potentially send her to prison for several years. But prison was just the beginning of her problems. The civil lawsuits started immediately. Every neighbor who'd lost a pet to suspicious circumstances hired lawyers and filed wrongful death claims. The damages added up quickly, not just the value of the animals themselves, but veterinary bills, emotional distress, and punitive damages. Mrs. James's insurance company refused to cover her, claiming that intentional criminal acts weren't covered under her homeowner's policy. Her legal fees alone were running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Mrs. James had been so focused on her war against neighborhood pets that she'd neglected other aspects of her life. Her house, which had always been immaculate, had been accumulating code violations for months. Her property taxes were delinquent. Her mortgage payments had become irregular as she diverted money to legal fees. And then there was the matter of her late husband's estate. William James had died 3 years earlier, leaving behind a complicated financial situation that his widow had been too proud to address properly. She'd been living on savings and Social Security, pretending to be more financially secure than she actually was. The legal fees from the criminal case, combined with the mounting civil judgments, pushed her over the edge. In June, the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on her house. The woman who'd lived in the same home for 42 years, who'd treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom, was about to lose everything. The foreclosure sale was scheduled for July 15th. I learned about it the same way everyone else did, from the legal notice posted on Mrs. James's front door. By that point, she'd already been convicted on all 4 of the animal cruelty charges. The prosecutor had offered her a plea deal that would have included jail time, restitution, and probation, but she'd refused, insisting on her innocence even in the face of overwhelming evidence. The jury had deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding her guilty. The judge, clearly disgusted by the evidence, had sentenced her to 2 years in prison followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to all the victims, a total of nearly $150,000. Mrs. James had appealed, of course, but she was out on bail and running out of options. The foreclosure sale would be the final nail in the coffin of her old life. I should have felt satisfied. Justice had been served, the system had worked, and Mrs. James was facing real consequences for her actions. But I felt empty, hollow, like winning this fight couldn't fill the hole that Daisy's death had left in my life. The morning of the foreclosure sale, I was sitting in my backyard when I heard shouting from next door. Mrs. James was on her porch, screaming at the bank representatives who'd come to oversee the sale. "This is my house," she shrieked. "I've lived here for 40 years, you can't just take it away." But they could, and they were. The house sold for less than she owed on the mortgage, which meant she'd be leaving with nothing but debt and a criminal record. As the buyers and bank officials conducted their business, Mrs. James noticed me watching from my yard. She marched over to the fence, the same fence she'd reached over to poison Daisy, and fixed me with a look of pure hatred. "Are you happy now?" she spat. "Is this what you wanted? To destroy an old woman's life?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a monster, but a pathetic person who'd spent years spreading misery and had finally reaped what she'd sowed. I didn't destroy your life, I said quietly. You did that yourself when you decided to murder innocent animals. That dog was a menace, she shouted. It was disturbing the peace. Someone had to do something. Someone did do something, I replied. They trained her to save my life. Every time Daisy barked, she was keeping me from having a complete breakdown. She was doing her job, and you killed her for it. Mrs. James's face twisted with rage. You're weak, you're pathetic. You use your so-called trauma as an excuse to inconvenience everyone around you. Maybe I am weak, I said, but I'm not cruel, I'm not a killer, and I'm not the one losing everything because I couldn't control my own hatred. She started to respond, but one of the bank officials called for her attention. The sale was complete, and she had 24 hours to vacate the premises. Mrs. James looked back at me one last time, her eyes filled with impotent rage. This isn't over, she said, but it was over, and we both knew it. Mrs. James left the neighborhood on July 16th, driving away in a packed Toyota Camry with everything she owned. I watched from my window as she pulled out of the driveway for the last time, her shoulders hunched in defeat. She was scheduled to report to prison in 2 weeks. After that, she'd serve her sentence, then emerge to a world where she had no home, no savings, and a criminal record that would make it nearly impossible to find decent housing or employment. The house next door sold quickly to a young couple with a baby and a golden retriever named Max. They were kind, normal people. I never saw Mrs. James again, but I heard updates through the legal system. She served 18 months of her 2-year sentence, getting out early for good behavior. The civil judgments followed her after her release, garnishing her Social Security checks and ensuring she'd never have enough money to live comfortably again. As for me, I'd like to say that winning this fight healed me completely, but that's not how trauma works. I still had PTSD. I still had panic attacks. I still woke up screaming sometimes. But I also had something new. Proof that I was stronger than I'd thought. Proof that I could fight back when someone tried to destroy me. Proof that evil doesn't always win. 2 months after Mrs. James left, I got a call from the service dog training facility. They had a 2-year-old German shepherd named Luna who'd been returned by a family that couldn't handle her energy level. She was fully trained, perfectly healthy, and in need of a home. She's a lot like Daisy, the trainer told me. Gentle, intuitive, completely devoted to her handler. I think you two might be perfect for each other. I wasn't sure I was ready. The thought of loving another dog, of risking that kind of loss again, terrified me. But Dr. Park reminded me that healing isn't about avoiding risk. It's about finding the courage to live, despite the possibility of pain. I met Luna on a Saturday morning in September. She was beautiful, black and tan with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to my soul. When I knelt down to greet her, she approached cautiously, then gently placed her head against my chest, right over my heart. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a while. Hope. Luna came home with me that afternoon. She explored every inch of the house, sniffing the corners where Daisy used to sleep, investigating the toys I'd never had the heart to throw away. That first night, she positioned herself beside my bed in the exact spot where Daisy used to lie, as if she somehow knew she had big paws to fill. It wasn't easy. Every time Luna barked during one of my episodes, I thought about Mrs. James's cruel words, her hateful face as she watched Daisy die. But I also thought about the security footage that caught her in the act, the conviction that followed, the justice that finally came. Mrs. James had tried to silence my pain by destroying the one thing that helped me bear it. Instead, she taught me that I was capable of fighting back, of demanding justice, of refusing to be a victim. Luna wasn't a replacement for Daisy. No dog could be. But she was something else. Proof that love could survive hatred, that healing could triumph over cruelty, that sometimes the broken can become unbreakable. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button. And don't forget to share this video and subscribe if you haven't already. We've got more incredible revenge stories coming your way.